Waryong Mountain, September 26, 2002. Two men gathering acorns push through the brush and find old clothing, shoes, and human bones. The remains belong to 5 boys reported missing 11 years earlier. Woo Chul-won, 13. Jo Ho-yeon, 12. Kim Young-gyu, 11. Park Chan-in, 10. And Kim Jong-sik, 9. But the police quickly suggest the children became lost and froze together. 6 weeks later, forensic scientists reach a starkly different conclusion: homicide. The findings should have opened a murder investigation. Instead, it exposed how much evidence had already been missed, disturbed, or permanently destroyed. The story began on March 26, 1991, a temporary public holiday for South Korea's first local elections in roughly 30 years. With schools closed, the 5 neighborhood friends gathered near their homes in Daegu. Reports placed their departure between about 8 and 9 that morning. A friend later said they were going toward Waryong Mountain to collect salamander eggs. That statement became the main basis for reconstructing their destination. Early news reports described the trip as a hunt for frogs or frog eggs. The media label Frog Boys stayed, although the children never called themselves that. Shortly after 1 that afternoon, Chul-won's father learned that his son had missed a scheduled taekwondo class. By then, every ordinary explanation was beginning to fail. The boys did not return for lunch. They did not appear at friends' homes. As evening approached, their families began searching the neighborhood and mountain paths. Election coverage occupied officials and newsrooms that day. It contributed to the circumstances, but the evidence cannot prove that the election alone caused the failed response. Police first considered the boys possible runaways. That assumption shaped early notices and weakened attention on the route they were most likely to have taken. Within days, the case grew into a national emergency. Police units, soldiers, and volunteers moved across hillsides while the children's faces spread through television and newspapers. A 1996 account listed roughly 300,000 cumulative police deployments across searches, checks, and interviews. That figure did not mean 300,000 different people searched at once. A separate 2002 report described about 71,000 personnel used specifically in mountain searches. Later retellings blurred these categories and inflated the appearance of total coverage. The scale was enormous. The focus was not. Contemporary reporting indicates that investigators concentrated on terrain 3 to 4 kilometers from where the remains were eventually found. There is no proof that officers repeatedly walked directly over the remains. The safer conclusion is more troubling. A massive but poorly directed operation missed them on one small mountain. The mountain was not remote wilderness. Homes, streets, and schools stood close by. That made the disappearance harder to explain and every reported sighting more urgent. False ransom demands reached the families. Strangers reported sightings from across the country. Each claim created a new journey, and most ended without evidence. The fathers left or suspended their jobs. They traveled in a truck displaying the children's photographs and handed out flyers for years. Their search turned 5 private losses into a national wound. Yet publicity also attracted people offering certainty without evidence. By 1996, 5 years had passed. The central problem remained unchanged. No verified witness could place all 5 boys after they headed toward the mountain. Then a self-described criminal psychologist claimed that Jung-sik's father had killed the children and buried them beneath his own house. The allegation came from speculative personality analysis, not physical evidence. Even so, police brought excavation equipment to the property while cameras watched. Investigators dug through the house and found nothing. The accuser was reportedly booked for defamation, but the public harm could not be reversed. As digging machinery tears into the floor, Jong-sik's family watches another search turn against them. Grief has been recast as suspicion without a single supporting trace. Jong-sik's father died in 2001. He never learned where his son was and never saw his name separated from the accusation broadcast around the country. The episode revealed a recurring weakness in the case. When physical evidence was absent, confident stories were allowed to take its place. 1 year later, the mountain finally returned something real. The discovery lay near the route associated with the boys from the beginning. On September 26, 2002, 2 local residents were collecting acorns when they noticed decayed clothing. Human bones lay close by. Shoes and personal items helped connect the site to the missing children. Soon, the remains were identified as all 5 boys. The discovery resolved one question and opened a worse one. How had 5 sets of remains survived together on the mountain without being found for 11 years? Police offered an answer almost immediately. They suggested the boys had become lost, huddled together, and died from cold exposure. That explanation came before specialists had reconstructed the skeletons, examined the skull injuries, or established how the remains had been covered. Then, the most damaging error began. Police dug into the site before forensic experts could document each skeleton's original position. Professor Chae Jong-min later said bones were moved and rearranged. Clothing, soil layers, and objects lost the relationships that could have explained the scene. Members of the media and public were also present. For hours, the place operated less like a protected crime scene than an open excavation. Once the bones were lifted, no later test could restore their exact positions. The investigation had recovered the children while losing part of the story of their deaths. Rain begins washing across churned soil as evidence markers tilt and loose objects slide from their original places. The mountain's last intact record is disappearing. The damage made one basic issue uncertain. Had the boys been deliberately buried, hurriedly concealed, or gradually covered by natural sediment? The forensic team believed the remains were initially concealed with some soil and stones, then covered further by weather and natural accumulation. Their reasoning included limited animal scattering, the grouping of the remains, insect pupa evidence inside a skull, and deformation consistent with prolonged pressure. That does not prove a carefully dug, 50-centimeter grave or deliberately positioned boulders. The surviving evidence supports partial concealment, not a precise burial ritual. After roughly 6 weeks of examination, the Kyungpook National University team announced its conclusion on November 12, 2002. The boys had been killed. Diagnostic cranial trauma was established in 3 children, not all 5. That distinction matters because the surviving remains could not reveal every cause of death. Woo Chulwon and Kim Jong-sik had multiple marks attributed to a squared or U-shaped object and a sharp implement. Kim Young-yu had a fracture about 10 centimeters long on the right side of his skull. The team considered the injuries human-inflicted and sustained around death. Bleeding caused by cranial trauma was proposed as the fatal mechanism. The evidence overturned the early hypothermia announcement, but did not reveal the full sequence. The team suggested pointed and blunt implements may have been used. It did not identify a screwdriver, hammer, caliper, or any other specific weapon. The central question had changed. The boys had not simply vanished on the mountain. Someone had injured at least 3 of them and probably concealed the group. But who could attack 5 children together? leave no identified weapon, and disappear without one verified confession, motive, or offender trace. A distant blast rolls across the ridge as 5 small figures turn toward the sound and birds erupt from the trees. It is the image behind the case's most persistent theory, a military firing range operated near the discovery area. Bullets, cartridge cases, and other ammunition components were recovered around or among the remains. Some ammunition was reportedly inside folded or tied clothing. Detached from context, that detail sounds like direct proof of military involvement. The context weakens that inference. The area had been used for shooting, and local children reportedly collected spent ammunition as objects of interest. Investigators found no firearm damage or blood on the examined clothing. They also reported no bullet marks or other evidence of shooting on the bones. Some M1 and carbine ammunition recovered there was described as belonging to weapons withdrawn before 1977, 14 years before the boys disappeared. The military reported no scheduled firing exercise on the election holiday. One documented range was offset from the site and separated by a ridge. Residents disputed whether another temporary firing position had existed. That uncertainty keeps the military connection open as an avenue, but not as a demonstrated explanation. One witness reportedly heard a loud sound followed by a scream. A shoeshiner later described a customer who claimed soldiers had killed the boys after an accident. Neither account was corroborated. The alleged customer was never established as a participant, and the physical evidence still showed no shooting injuries. The firing range explains why ammunition could be present. It does not explain the cranial injuries, identify an offender, or prove a military cover-up. In June 2022, an anonymous internet user proposed a new weapon, a vernier caliper, a metal measuring tool with pointed jaws. The post also invented a group of technical school students, supposedly inhaling glue on the mountain before committing the killings. No witness or evidence placed such a group there. In a televised experiment, a caliper's jaws strike test material and leave paired marks. Then, pruning shears produce marks with a similar appearance. The experiment suggested that more than one double-edged or pointed tool might create similar patterns. It could not identify what caused decades-old injuries. Criminologist Lee Soo-jung considered the wound shape proposal worth examining. That was not an endorsement of the invented offenders or a forensic identification of the weapon. The caliper claim remains a hypothesis about shape, wrapped inside an unsupported story about who used it. The distinction is the difference between testing and solving. The original cold exposure theory is weaker still. Variable weather and later rain could explain exposure, but not human-inflicted cranial trauma or probable concealment. Hunter, poacher, and unknown stranger theories face another problem. Police checked many local groups, but no verified weapon, motive, or trace connected anyone to the boys. The strongest broad conclusion is also the least dramatic. An unknown person or group killed the boys locally and concealed them at least partly on Waryong Mountain. Beyond that, the evidence breaks apart. There is no identified murder weapon, verified suspect, confession, motive, offender profile, or proven sequence of deaths. Modern testing cannot reconstruct bone positions that police destroyed in 2002. It cannot reliably determine which objects belonged with which child once the scene was mixed. After the case reopened in 2019, preserved clothing went to the National Forensic Service. Examiners reportedly found no foreign DNA or other decisive offender trace. That failure does not clear anyone. It shows the limit of new technology when evidence was never collected properly, contaminated, or lost. Investigators may still find a contradiction in thousands of old statements, but any useful lead must survive the damage done by time, memory, and the original investigation. The legal clock creates another barrier. The original 15-year statute of limitations expired on March 25, 2006. South Korea abolished limitation periods for qualifying murders in 2015. But the amendment generally did not revive cases whose time limits had already expired. A narrow exception might apply if investigators proved that an offender's actions legally suspended the clock. No such fact has been established publicly in this case. Finding the killer could therefore establish historical truth without allowing an ordinary murder prosecution. For the families, that still would not make the truth meaningless. In 2019, National Police Commissioner Min Gap-ryong ordered the investigation restarted from the beginning. Old tips, preserved objects, and forensic possibilities were reviewed again. As of March 2026, Daegu police said the case remained active. Officers continued assessing tips, working with forensic specialists, and considering newer tools, including AI-assisted review. No meaningful new lead, suspect, or weapon has been announced. 35 years after the disappearance, the central gap remains the hours after the boys left home. It is still unknown whether all 5 died in one event, whether different methods were used, or whether the attacker was someone they trusted enough to approach. It is unknown whether the ammunition mixed with their clothing before death, during concealment, or during the destructive recovery. Even its original position cannot be reconstructed confidently. It is also unknown whether the boys sought only salamander eggs, collected spent ammunition too, or encountered someone through an entirely different chain of events. The mountain may still hold no more evidence. The surviving answer could instead be buried in an overlooked statement, an impossible timeline, or a name repeated across old files. The 5 children were Woo Chel-won, Jo Ho-yeon, Kim Yong-yu, Park Chan-in, and Kim Jong-sik. Their story is larger than the label later given to them. The evidence supports homicide and partial concealment. It does not support declaring that soldiers, students, calipers, bullets, or hypothermia solved the case. The most consequential suspect may never have been named. The most consequential mistake is documented. When the boys were finally found, the scene that could explain their deaths was not protected. The families have endured rumors, false accusations, and theories built beyond the evidence. What they still seek is simpler, a truthful account of the boys' final morning. Which surviving clue do you believe offers the best chance of finally revealing who killed the 5 boys?